Dan Bongino leaned into the microphone, ready to speak. "Today," he announced, "I'm going to prove you are the biggest fraud in congressional history." He said it so calmly, almost as if he were simply reading a weather report or stating a straightforward fact that everyone in the room would soon come to accept as truth. The House Oversight Committee hearing room suddenly went completely silent. Every camera, every reporter, and every staffer froze in place. Then, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but a performance laugh. The kind she'd practiced in front of mirrors, the kind that clearly said this man was beneath her, the kind that would play perfectly on Instagram clips. "Oh, this should be good," she thought. She then leaned into her own microphone, her $3,000 blazer catching the light just so. Her team had specifically picked that blazer for the cameras. They had spent a full 45 minutes on her makeup that morning. This was meant to be her moment, another viral clip of her absolutely destroying a Republican witness. A failed cop turned podcast bro is going to lecture me about fraud? She paused for effect, glancing around the room with theatrical disbelief. "What's next?" she scoffed. "Are you going to try to sell me some gold coins? Or perhaps some survival food for the apocalypse?" Scattered laughter rippled from the Democratic side of the room. A few staffers pulled out their phones, eager to capture what they assumed would be yet another Ocasio-Cortez takedown. She was truly in her element now. This was what she did best. This was who she truly was. The clapback queen. The social media warrior. The very voice of a generation. "Maybe you should stick to screaming into a microphone for angry boomers," she continued. "Leave the real work to people who actually understand policy." More laughter followed. A staffer gave her a quick thumbs up. Bongino didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table, observing her performance with the patience of a man who'd spent 12 years in the Secret Service. He had protected presidents. He had faced down genuine threats. He had learned, above all else, to wait. The laughter slowly faded. The silence stretched, becoming palpable. Ocasio-Cortez's smile flickered just for a moment. She wasn't used to opponents who simply didn't react. She thrived on reactions. She absolutely needed them. "Are you done?" Bongino asked, his voice flat and utterly unimpressed. "I'm just getting started, tough guy," she retorted. "You're everything wrong with good." Bongino then reached down and opened his briefcase. The leather was worn, clearly well used, practical, and certainly nothing fancy. "So am I," he stated, his voice even. He pulled out a single folder. Not thick, not dramatic at all, just a plain manila folder with a typed label clearly visible on the front. He set it gently on the table, positioning it so every camera in the room could clearly read the words. The label read, "Ocasio-Cortez. Ani mam sotits." The fraud. The room instantly stirred. Whispers rippled audibly through the gallery. $47 million. Bongino let those words hang heavily in the air. He didn't rush them, not one bit. He gave them ample space to breathe. That's exactly how much money flowed through your network of PACs, LLCs, and shell companies in just 4 years. 47 million from people who truly believed in you. He opened the folder. "I know where every single penny went," he stated. "Every transfer, every payment, every lie." He looked directly at her, his gaze unwavering. His eyes were steady, utterly certain. "By the time I'm done here today, so will everyone watching." He pulled out the very first document. "You should have stayed a bartender, Congresswoman. At least that was an honest job." Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth, ready to respond, to clap back, to do exactly what she always did. But no words came out. For the very first time in her political career, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had absolutely nothing to say. And Dan Bongino was truly just getting started. Bongino then flipped to the first section of the folder. He moved with the methodical patience of a man who'd built cases against drug cartels and protected presidents from assassins. Every single gesture was deliberate. Every pause was carefully calculated. "Let's start with something simple," he said. "Let's talk about how you live." Ocasio-Cortez rolled her eyes with a practiced dismissiveness. "Oh, here we go again," she mumbled. "The right-wing obsession with my clothes. Very original, very creative." "Not your clothes, Congresswoman," Bongino countered. "Your choices. The canyon between what you preach and how you actually live your life." He then set the lease on the table. "Your apartment in Navy Yard, Washington, D.C. for $3,500 a month," he revealed. "A luxury building with a rooftop pool, a state-of-the-art fitness center, and a 24-hour concierge." He looked up at her then. "That rent is more than most families in your district earn in an entire month." "Not just their rent," he emphasized, "but their total income, everything they make from working 2 or even 3 jobs." Ocasio-Cortez shifted noticeably in her seat. Her posture changed, but only slightly, though the cameras perfectly caught it. "That's standard for D.C. housing prices," she insisted. "So members of Congress are supposed to maintain 2 residences. But do they really?" Bongino then pulled out another document, a spreadsheet with several highlighted rows. "Here's a list," he declared, "of available apartments within 2 miles of the Capitol building. Plenty of options under $2,000, some even under $1,500. Modest places," he continued, "the kind of places where working people actually live." He carefully set the list down. "But you didn't want those, did you? You wanted the luxury building, the one with amenities most of your constituents will never even experience. The one that costs more per month than some of them earn in 6 weeks of full-time work." He paused for a moment. "Nothing wrong with wanting nice things, Congresswoman. Nothing wrong with enjoying success. But there is something wrong with building your entire political brand on telling other people they can't have nice things, all while you're living in luxury." Ocasio-Cortez's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. She waved him away with an irritated, dismissive gesture. Bongino then moved on to his next exhibit. "Let's talk about the Green New Deal," he proposed. "Your signature legislation, the very policy that made you a national figure." He pulled out a thick, imposing document. "You stood on the floor of the House and declared that climate change is an existential threat. You said we had 12 years to act, or the world as we know it would simply end. You said every American needed to radically change how they live, how they travel, and how they consume." He then pulled out another spreadsheet. 66 flights in 12 months, all exposed in FAA records. Every single one of them, first class or business class. A murmur stirred through the room. "Your personal carbon footprint from air travel alone is actually larger than 20 average American families combined. 20 families in just 1 year." He set the spreadsheet down with a thud. "You want working people to give up their cars. You want them to stop eating meat. You want them to fundamentally transform their lives, all to save the planet." He looked directly at her. "But first class is more comfortable, isn't it?" Ocasio-Cortez quickly grabbed her microphone. her voice pitching noticeably higher. "Those were work-related flights," she retorted, "for official congressional business." "Were they, though?" Bongino then pulled out a photograph. He held it up so every single camera could see it clearly. "This is Miami Beach. February of 2021, he elaborated, while Texas was freezing, while people were literally dying without power or heat. The photo showed Ocasio-Cortez in a bikini, champagne glass in hand, laughing on a beach cabana. You flew to Florida for a fundraiser at a beachfront mansion, all while your colleagues were organizing relief efforts and your constituents in New York were grappling with their own winter weather emergencies." He carefully set the photo down. "This image," he explained, "was originally posted by a friend of yours on Instagram. They deleted it within an hour when someone pointed out the optics, but nothing ever truly disappears from the internet." He pulled out another image. "And here you are, just 2 days later, back in New York, tweeting about climate justice and the urgent need for the Green New Deal." He looked at her with something that almost approached pity. "The champagne on the beach was nice, though, I'm sure." Ocasio-Cortez's face flushed a deep red. Her hands gripped tightly to the edge of the table. "That was a previously scheduled," she began. "Let's move on." Bongino quickly interrupted. He wasn't interested in her explanations. He was building a compelling case. "You champion defunding the police, Sanifitis," he stated. "You say communities don't need armed officers patrolling their streets. You say the money should go to social services instead. Mental health workers, community programs, anything but cops." He spread out a brand new set of documents. "Your personal security expenses for the last 2 years," he revealed, "exposed through financial disclosures that your office tried very hard to bury in paperwork." He pointed directly to the numbers. Over $70,000, exposed right here in black and white. He looked pointedly at her. "Armed private security, trained professionals with guns to keep you safe, while you tell single mothers in the Bronx that they don't need police protection." "That's completely different," she interjected. "I receive credible death threats. My life has been—" "So do they, Congresswoman," Bongino countered. Bongino's voice suddenly hardened. "The single mother working the night shift at a bodega in your district. The elderly man walking home from church. The kids trying to get to school through gang territory. They face threats every single day. Real threats. Constant threats." He paused again. "The difference is, they can't afford $70,000 in private security. And you want to take away the only protection they have?" The room was now completely silent. Even the clicking of keyboards had entirely stopped. Bongino pulled out one more set of documents from this particular section. "Your staff," he began. "The people who work for you every single day. The young idealists who truly believed in your message and wanted to be part of your movement." He then read from an official filing. "Anonymous complaints filed with the Office of Congressional Ethics." Let me read you some highlights. He adjusted his reading glasses deliberately. Quote, "The Congresswoman demands absolute loyalty, but treats her staff like personal servants. Unpaid overtime is simply expected, and any complaints are met with threats about their career future." End quote. He then flipped to another page. Quote, "She preaches about workers' rights on television, yet she runs her own office like a sweatshop. Interns work full-time hours with absolutely no compensation, all while she gives speeches about living wages." End quote. Another page appeared. Quote, "There are 2 distinct versions of her. There's the public one who genuinely cares about working people, and then there's the private one who screams at junior staff for bringing her the wrong coffee." End quote. He deliberately set the documents down. The so-called champion of the working class can't even treat her own workers with basic human decency. Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked, revealing a hint of vulnerability. Those complaints were never substantiated. They're anonymous accusations from disgruntled. They're sworn statements, Congresswoman, filed under penalty of perjury by people who worked for you, who believed in you, who truly saw who you really are when the cameras aren't rolling. Bongino closed that section of the folder. But, you know what? Living like a hypocrite isn't actually a crime. It's just sad, just pathetic. Just proof that you don't believe a single word of what you preach. He opened the next section, revealing more documents. The pages here were noticeably thicker, more dense with information. This is where we get to the actual crimes. Bongino took a slow, deliberate breath before continuing. He fully understood pacing. He understood exactly how to build tension. This was the section that would undeniably end careers. Let's talk about money, he stated calmly. Specifically, let's talk about the $47 million that flowed through your political network in just 4 years. He pulled out a complex diagram with lines connecting various boxes, arrows vividly showing flows of money, and names and organizations all tangled together like a messy brand-new Congress PAC. Justice Democrats. Courage to Change PAC. 3 organizations all connected to you, all moving money in patterns that would easily make a professional money launderer jealous. Ocasio-Cortez forced a dismissive laugh, trying to brush it off. Those are legitimate political organizations that support progressive candidates across the country, that were used to move money in circles until no one could possibly trace where it actually went, Bongino countered sharply. Bongino held up the diagram for all to see. Let me walk you through it, step by step. Simple enough for everyone watching at home to fully understand. He pointed to the very first box. Donations come in to brand new Congress PAC. Small donors, working people, individuals who genuinely believed in your message about fighting corruption and representing the little guy. They gave $20, $50, whatever they could afford, truly. Some of them even skipped meals to donate. He traced a clear line on the chart. That money then gets paid to Brand New Congress, LLC, a private limited liability company for, quote, campaign services. Sounds legitimate, right? He drew another line. Brand New Congress, LLC then pays a company called Middle Seat Consulting for more, quote, services, end quote. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. Want to guess who controls Middle Seat Consulting? Silence filled the room. Your former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti. The same man who founded Justice Democrats. The same man who recruited you to run for Congress in the first place. The man who discovered you at a casting call, yes, a casting call for progressive candidates. Bongino set the diagram down, his point made. The money goes in a circle from PAC to LLC to consulting firm, and then right back into the pockets of your inner circle. Along the way, millions of dollars simply disappear into vague categories like operating expenses and consulting fees. He pulled out official filings, presenting them as evidence. Federal Election Commission records show over $1 million in payments that cannot be properly accounted for. The documentation is missing. The services are undefined. The money just vanished. He spread the papers out across the table. The FEC has received multiple formal complaints about these arrangements, as you know. They've been investigating for years. The only reason charges haven't been filed is because the commission has been deadlocked along partisan lines. He looked directly at her, his gaze unwavering. But the FBI doesn't have that problem, and they've been looking at this very carefully. Ocasio-Cortez's attorney was writing furiously on his legal pad, his hand shaking slightly. He looked visibly pale. "Let's talk about something more specific," Bongino continued, his voice calm. "Let's talk about your boyfriend." The room went completely still, an undeniable tension in the air. This was personal now, and everyone felt it. "Riley Roberts, your longtime partner. By all accounts, a nice enough guy. Not a political operative, not a campaign strategist, and certainly not a communications expert. His background is primarily in web development. He set down payment records, showing them clearly. Your campaign and associated PACs paid Riley Roberts $6,000 a month, every single month for over a year, for, quote, marketing consulting. He did the math out loud, letting the numbers sink in. That's more than $72,000 from donor money for marketing consulting. He looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez. What did he produce? What campaigns did he create? What marketing strategies did he develop? What deliverables even exist with his name on them? The silence in the room stretched on. "I'll answer for you, Congresswoman. Nothing. There's no portfolio, no documented work product, no evidence that he did a single thing to earn that money. Just checks written to your boyfriend from funds donated by working people who thought they were backing a political movement." Ocasio-Cortez's voice rose defensively. "Riley provided valuable digital strategy and ongoing consultation on—" Bongino's voice cut right through her explanation. "Show this committee one single piece of work he produced. One strategy document, one campaign creative, one email chain discussing deliverables, one anything." She didn't respond. "I've reviewed every filing, every single document your campaign has ever produced. His name only appears on payment records, never on any actual work product." He then pulled out another piece of paper. "But here's where it gets really interesting. Let me tell you about Maria Gonzalez." He paused, letting that name hang in the air. "Maria Gonzalez, a single mother of two, lives in the Bronx, in your district, the very district you claim to represent and fight for." He set down a printed statement. "Maria works 2 jobs. She cleans office buildings downtown at night. During the day, she works at a laundromat, folding other people's clothes. When you average it out, she makes about $14 an hour. No benefits, no sick days, no vacation." He glanced down at the document. "In 2018, Maria donated $50 to your campaign. That $50 represented a full day's wages for her. She actually had to skip buying groceries that week just to afford it." He looked back up at Ocasio-Cortez. "She believed in you. She watched your videos. She saw someone who looked like her, who talked about struggles just like hers, who promised to fight for the people the system had forgotten." He tapped the payment record for Riley Roberts. "Maria's $50 helped pay your boyfriend $6,000 a month to produce absolutely nothing." His voice dropped even lower. "Maria skipped meals so her own kids could eat that week, and her donation went to subsidize your boyfriend's lifestyle." Ocasio-Cortez blinked rapidly. Her eyes were getting wet. Whether it was from genuine emotion or pure calculation, it was hard to tell. That's a gross mischaracterization of how campaign finance—" "Is it?" Bongino pulled out an email printout. "Let me read you something. This is an email from your personal account to Saikat Chakrabarti, dated March 15, 2019. He read it slowly, making sure every single word was captured by the microphones. Quote, "Make sure the transfers don't look connected. Use different entity names for each step. The small donors can never find out who's really benefiting from their money. Keep it clean on paper." End quote. He set the email down on the table. That's not staff making accounting errors. That's not confusion about complicated campaign finance regulations. That's you, personally and directly, instructing your chief of staff to hide where the money was going. A Democratic member of the committee shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The ranking member was just staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. You told Maria Gonzalez and thousands of donors just like her that their money was funding a movement, a revolution, a fight for the working class against the corrupt establishment. Bongino's voice hardened. It was funding your inner circle, your boyfriend, your political operatives, your personal lifestyle. He pulled out one final document from this section. Total amount of donor money that went directly to entities controlled by you, your boyfriend, or your close personal associates based on FEC filings and corporate registry records, $4.2 million. He let that number just sit in the air. $4.2 million. From people like Maria Gonzalez, from people who sacrificed for you, who believed you were different from every other politician. He closed that section of the folder. But that's just the money we can trace to American donors. Not all the money came from Americans. He opened the next section. And that's where this story gets really dark. Bongino turned to a new tab in his folder. This section had photographs clipped right to the top. These were images that had shaped history. June 24, 2018, he began. A date that completely transformed your entire career. A date that made you a national figure. He held up the famous photograph. Every person in America had seen it. Ocasio-Cortez at the border fence in Texas, hand pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The very image of compassion confronting cruelty. This image went viral within hours. It was shared millions of times. It launched 1,000 news segments and magazine covers. It turned you from just a long-shot primary challenger into a national icon. He placed it down gently, almost reverently. It was a young Latina congresswoman, visibly emotional at the sight of immigrant children separated from their parents. It felt powerful. It felt moving. It was precisely what the moment called for. He paused. There was just one issue with that story. He then held up another photograph. This one, actually, was snapped 5 minutes before the famous shot, from the same location on the same day, by the very same photographer who had held on to all his images and kindly shared the full sequence with federal investigators. The second photo showed Ocasio-Cortez at the same fence, wearing the same white outfit. But she wasn't crying. Instead, she was laughing with her staff, checking her makeup in her phone screen, and adjusting her hair for the cameras. And this picture was taken 12 minutes after the crying photo. A third image appeared. Ocasio-Cortez was smiling broadly, posing for selfies with her supporters. Not a single tear was in sight, and her makeup was fresh and flawless. Your grief, he stated, lasted for precisely as long as it needed to for the photographers to capture the shot. Roughly 5 minutes, he added, sandwiched between smiles and selfies. Ocasio-Cortez shook her head vigorously, her voice rising. Those photos, she insisted, are completely taken out of context. I was genuinely overwhelmed by what I saw at that facility. Were you? Bongino questioned, pulling out a text message log. This is from your communications director that morning, he announced. Sent 3 hours before you even arrived at the facility. He read from the printout. Quote, make sure photographers are positioned at the fence before she arrives. We need the emotion shot. Have tissues ready in case she needs them. Tell her to think about something sad if she needs to get the tears going. End quote, he finished, setting it down. The emotion shot. That's what your team actually called it. Not a genuine moment of human compassion. A shot, a performance, something created and captured for maximum political impact. He then pulled out another text exchange. And this one, he revealed, is from you, sent to your campaign manager 2 hours after the photos were taken. He read, quote, "The crying pic is blowing up everywhere. This is going to be massive for fundraising. Get the donation page ready. We need to capitalize before the news cycle moves on." End quote, he concluded. His voice dropped, becoming lower and harder. The children in those facilities were real. Their fear was real. Their confusion about being separated from their parents was real. Their suffering was real. He looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez. "And you used them as props for a fundraising email." Ocasio-Cortez's voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion. "I care deeply about those children. I have fought tirelessly for immigration reform." "Have you?" Bongino asked, pulling out a calendar document. "This is your official congressional schedule for the 2 years following that famous photograph. Let's count how many times you actually visited a border facility to truly engage with the issue." He flipped through the pages. The answer is 0. Not once. You never went back. "The photo op was enough," he remarked. He then pulled out more documents. "But you did find time to do 427 media interviews about the border. You found time for magazine photo-oots and documentary appearances. You found time to raise $11.3 million off immigration-related appeals." He set the papers down. "You just never found time to actually go back and do anything substantive about the problem." He spread out printouts of her social media posts. "You called those facilities concentration camps. You compared Border Patrol agents to Nazi guards. You said America was operating a system of state-sponsored terror against brown children." He looked at her. Strong words, inflammatory words, words specifically designed to generate maximum outrage and maximum donations. He pulled out a different document. Words that also put targets on the backs of federal agents trying to do an impossible job. He read from an incident report. 3 Border Patrol agents were physically assaulted by protesters who cited your rhetoric as justification. One of them, Agent Manuel Padilla, was hospitalized for 2 weeks with a severe concussion and 3 broken ribs. He has a wife and 3 young children who spent those 2 weeks wondering if their father would ever be the same. Ocasio-Cortez opened her mouth for once. Nothing came out. "You got your headlines?" Bongino questioned. "Agent Padilla got brain damage and broken bones." Bongino moved to the next page. "But let's examine what you actually did for immigration policy. Not the tweets, not the Instagram stories, not the cable news appearances, but the actual legislative work." He held up a thin document. "This is every piece of immigration-related legislation you've sponsored in 4 years in Congress." He flipped through the pages slowly. "Resolutions," he began. "Non-binding statements, symbolic gestures," he continued. "Press release material designed to generate social media engagement," he finished. He set it down. "Không một điều luật quan trọng nào được thông qua, không một thay đổi chính sách nào thực sự giúp ích cho một gia đình nhập cư nào, tất cả chỉ là diễn kịch." Ông ấy rút ra các hồ sơ tài chính. Nhưng trong khi cô đang thể hiện sự phẫn nộ, một điều thú vị đã xảy ra với hoạt động gây quỹ của cô. Ông ta trải các tài liệu ra. Các nhóm ủng hộ biên giới mở, các tổ chức vận động bãi bỏ, chấm dứt mọi trục xuất, loại bỏ mọi rào cản nhập cảnh. Họ đã quyên góp rất nhiều cho các quỹ của cô. Sau khi bức ảnh đó lan truyền, ông ta chỉ vào các mục cụ thể. Một số tổ chức này đã bị cơ quan thực thi pháp luật gần cổ vì có những mối liên hệ đáng lo ngại. Dòng tiền mà ông ta theo dõi ngược qua nhiều lớp đến những người hưởng lợi từ sự hỗn loạn ở biên giới. Ocasio-Cortez đập tay xuống bàn. Đó là một sự ám chỉ xúc phạm và phân biệt chủng tộc. Có phải vậy không? Bongino giơ báo cáo của Bộ An ninh Nội địa lên. Đây là từ một cuộc điều tra đang diễn ra về các mạng lưới tài trợ cho các tổ chức tích cực làm suy yếu an ninh biên giới. Các quỹ của cô đã nhận được tiền quyên góp từ 3 nhóm được nêu tên cụ thể trong báo cáo này. Ông ta đặt nó xuống. Cô có kiểm tra xem tiền đến từ đâu không? Cô có hỏi về những nhà tài trợ này không? Cô có làm bất kỳ sự thẩm định nào không? Im lặng. Cô chỉ việc nhận tiền và tiếp tục diễn. Ông ta hơi nghiêng người về phía trước. Mỗi năm, hàng ngàn người di cư chết khi băng qua sa mạc vì họ được cho biết biên giới đã mở và nước Mỹ đang chờ đợi với vòng tay rộng mở, phụ nữ bị tấn công, trẻ em bị buôn bán, các gia đình phải trả toàn bộ số tiền tiết kiệm cả đời cho các tổ chức tội phạm. Những kẻ bồ mạc họ chết dưới cái nóng. Giống ông ta giờ đã cao hơn, không còn về giáo sư nữa, gần như giận dữ. Và cô kiếm lời từ sự hỗn loạn. Cô gây quy tụ nỗi đau khổ. Cô xây dựng thương hiệu chính trị của mình trên xác những người mà cô tuyên bố quan tâm. Ông ta đóng phần đó lại. Nhưng việc lợi dụng người nhập cư để quyên góp và tương tác trên mạng xã hội thậm chí còn không phải là điều tồi tệ nhất mà cô đã làm. Ông ta mở phần tiếp theo của tập tài liệu, phần chính cuối cùng. Điều tồi tệ nhất là những gì cô thực sự nghĩ về những người đã thực sự bỏ phiếu cho cô. Những cái người tin rằng cô là một trong số họ. Bongino dừng lại trước khi mở phần này. Khi ông ta nói lại, giọng ông ta đã thay đổi. Khẽ khàng hơn, gần như buồn bã. Đây là phần sẽ đau đớn nhất, ông ta nói. Không phải cô, nữ nghị sĩ, cô đã biết có gì ở đây rồi. Cô đã sống qua nó. Ông ta nhìn về phía khán đài, về phía camera. Điều này sẽ làm tổn thương những người đang xem ở nhà. Những người đã tin tưởng cô, những người đã nhìn cô như một biểu tượng của hy vọng. Ông ta mở tập tài liệu. Hãy bắt đầu với Amazon. Ocasio-Cortez rõ ràng đã cúi người lại. Hai tay cô nắm chặt mép bàn. Năm 2019, Amazon công bố kế hoạch xây dựng trụ sở thứ hai tại Long Island City, Queens. Quân của cô. Ông ta rút ra các dự báo kinh tế. 25.000 việc làm, không phải việc làm lương tối thiểu, mà là các vị trí chuyên nghiệp với mức lương trung bình $150.000 mỗi năm, đầu tư trực tiếp hơn 2 tỷ đô la vào cộng đồng của cô, doanh thu thuế sẽ tài trợ cho các trường học và cơ sở hạ tầng trong nhiều thập kỷ. Ông ta trải các bài báo từ thời điểm đó ra. Cô đã lãnh đạo phe đối lập, cô đã tổ chức các cuộc biểu tình. Cô gọi đó là phúc lợi doanh nghiệp. Cô nói rằng các ưu đãi thuế là một món quà cho một tỷ phú không cần giúp đỡ. Ông ta rút ra một tuyên bố từ Amazon, và nó đã có tác dụng. Amazon đã rút lui. Họ đã đưa 25.000 việc làm đó đến nơi khác. Họ đã đầu tư hàng tỷ đô la đó vào một cộng đồng khác. Ông ta nhìn cô đã ăn mừng. Cô gọi đó là một chiến thắng cho nhân dân. Những người ủng hộ cô đã reo hò. Ông ta dừng lại. Nhưng chính xác là chiến thắng cho những người nào? Ông ta rút ra một email. Đây là từ tài khoản cá nhân của cô, gửi cho một nhà tài trợ lớn một tuần sau khi Amazon thông báo họ sẽ rút lui. Ông ta đọc chậm rãi, cẩn thận để đảm bảo từng từ đều được nghe thấy. Trích dẫn, chuyện Amazon đã diễn ra tốt đẹp hơn chúng tôi mong đợi. Những công nhân công nghệ đó sẽ hoàn toàn làm thay đổi bản chất khu phố trong vòng 5 năm. Họ sẽ bỏ phiếu cho các đảng viên Dân Chủ Trung Dung hoặc thậm chí là Đảng Cộng Hòa, tốt hơn là giữ nguyên cơ sở cử tri hiện tại. Những cái người nghèo phụ thuộc vào các chương trình của chính phủ là những cử tri đáng tin cậy của chúng ta. Đó là cơ sở của chúng ta. Đó là con đường dẫn đến quyền lực của chúng ta. Kết thúc trích dẫn. Phòng họp hoàn toàn im lặng. Không ai động đậy. Cô đã không giết chết 25.000 việc làm đó vì nguyên tắc, Bongino nói chậm rãi. Cô đã giết chúng vì những cử tri có tài chính ổn định, có học vấn có thể sẽ không cần cô nữa. Ông ta đặt email xuống, 25.000 gia đình, 25.000 cơ hội để những người lao động trong quán của cô xây dựng tài sản, mua nhà, gửi con cái đến các trường cao đẳng tốt để đạt được giấc mơ Mỹ mà cô tuyên bố đấu tranh cho. Ông ta nhìn cô và cô đã cố tình giết chết nó vì thành công của họ sẽ đe dọa quyền lực chính trị của cô. Ocasio-Cortez đang run rẩy. Giọng cô nghẹn lại. Email đó không phải ý thôi. It's being taken completely out of... What did you mean then? Explain it. Tell the people in your district what you meant when you said it's better to keep them poor and dependent. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Bongino pulled out phone records. Amazon was cold calculation, political strategy. This next part is personal. This is what you truly think about the people who trusted you. He held up a thick printout. These are text messages from your personal cell phone, legally obtained through a warrant issued as part of an ongoing federal investigation into campaign finance violations. He found a specific page. March 15th, 2021. Text message to a college friend from your Boston University days. He read slowly, letting each word land. Quote, "These Bronx people are honestly so easy to manipulate. Just say the word socialism a few times and throw in some Spanish phrases, and they cheer like trained seals." End quote. Gasps from the gallery. A staffer walked out of the room. Bongino continued, same conversation 2 minutes later. Quote, "They'll vote for me literally no matter what I do. They're not smart enough to realize when they're being played. All I have to do is say I'm fighting for them, and they believe it." End quote. More gasps. Someone in the gallery was crying, and then this one. Quote, "The Bronx is basically just my brand at this point, like a logo I own. I would never in a million years actually live there again. Can you imagine?" End quote. He set the phone records down. Those are your words, your private thoughts, written to a friend when you thought no one would ever see them, when you felt safe enough to say what you actually believe. Ocasio-Cortez's voice was barely a whisper. Broken. Those texts are taken completely out of context. I was venting about the pressures of what context makes it acceptable to call your voters trained seals. Silence. What context makes it okay to say they're too stupid to know when they're being played? More silence. What context makes calling your district just a brand that you own anything other than contempt for the people who elected you? Bongino didn't wait for an answer. There is no context that makes any of that acceptable. There's just you saying what you truly believe when you thought you were safe. He pulled out more documents. Let's talk about who you actually employ, who you trust to serve your constituents. He spread out personnel records, 14 full-time staffers in your congressional office. I went through their backgrounds, their resumes, and their histories. He pointed to the data. 12 of them are from out of state. They moved to New York to work for you. 10 have Ivy League degrees. Only 2 actually grew up in your district. Only 2 are actually from the community you claim to represent. He looked at her. Champion of the working-class Bronx can't find qualified workers from the Bronx. He pulled out another document. Your Hispanic outreach coordinator, the person responsible for connecting you with the Latino community, was raised in suburban Connecticut, attended Yale, and doesn't speak fluent Spanish. He set it down. But she had the right family connections. She knew the right people from the right schools. He pulled out more employment records. Meanwhile, there are young people in your district who would give anything for a chance to work in Congress. Kids who grew up in the Bronx, who went to public schools, who actually know the community, who could actually connect with constituents. He shook his head. You never gave them a chance. They didn't have the right credentials, the right pedigrees. Bongino pulled out one more piece of evidence. Speaking of your connection to the community, Let's talk about your heritage, your identity. Ocasio-Cortez tensed visibly. You present yourself as a Latina from the Bronx, a daughter of the working class, a woman connected to her Puerto Rican roots. He pulled out a transcript. This is from a Univision interview last year. You attempted to answer several questions in Spanish. Here's what a professional linguist who reviewed the tape had to say. He read from the analysis. Quote, "The subject speaks Spanish at approximately an intermediate tourist level. Her pronunciation is heavily Americanized. Her grammar is consistently incorrect in ways that a native speaker raised in a Spanish-speaking household would never make. The errors suggest someone who learned Spanish as a second language in school rather than at home." End quote. He set it down. You perform being Latina for the cameras. You use Spanish phrases as props, but the actual language, the actual culture, the actual connection to the community, you never really had it. Ocasio-Cortez was crying now. Tears cutting lines through her makeup, mascara running. My family is Puerto Rican. I am Puerto Rican. This is a racist attack on my identity. This isn't an attack on a Puerto Rican congresswoman. It's an observation about you specifically. It's about the gap between the identity you project and the real person you actually are. Bongino's voice softened just a little, not with sympathy, but with something closer to pity. You grew up in Yorktown Heights. The median household income there is $96,000 a year. It's one of New York's wealthier suburbs, with nice houses, good schools, safe streets, and country clubs nearby. He paused. There's nothing wrong with any of that. Nothing wrong with having a comfortable childhood. Nothing wrong with being fortunate. He looked right at her. But that's not the story you tell, is it? You tell people you're from the Bronx, born from struggle, from the streets. Because that story sells better. Because that story brings in donations. Because that story wins elections. He shook his head slowly. You essentially stole the identity of your own community. You appropriated their struggle, their story, and their pain just to advance your career. And in private, you actually laugh at them for being foolish enough to believe you. He closed the folder. That's not democratic socialism, Congresswoman. That's not fighting for the working class at all. That's simply fraud. Plain and simple fraud. The hearing room felt completely different now. The energy had shifted entirely. What started as a confident arena of political theater had turned into something else, something quieter, something much sadder. Ocasio-Cortez sat slumped in her chair. Her makeup was ruined. The polished warrior who had entered that morning had been replaced by someone smaller, someone broken. "I want to respond," she said. Her voice was raspy from crying. "I have the right to respond to these accusations." Chairman James nodded. "The witness has concluded his testimony," he stated. "The Congresswoman may now make a statement." Ocasio-Cortez straightened in her chair, trying to find the fire that had always ignited so easily before, trying to summon the fighter who had never backed down. "This is a political witch hunt," she began. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue, quote, "a coordinated attack by right-wing forces who are terrified of strong, progressive women. Every piece of so-called evidence presented today has been taken out of context, twisted, manipulated, and weaponized by people who want to silence the voice of working people in this country." She looked at the cameras, attempting to connect with her audience. "They're afraid of us, afraid of a movement that threatens their grip on power. So they dig through our emails, our private text messages, and our personal lives, looking for anything they can twist into a scandal. Her voice gained some strength. I will not be silenced. I will not be intimidated. And I will not apologize for fighting for the people who need a champion in Washington. She turned to face Bongino directly. You're a failed cop who couldn't make it in law enforcement. A conspiracy theorist who just spews nonsense to angry people for money. A puppet for billionaires who want to crush the dreams of ordinary Americans. She lifted her chin. Nothing you've said here today changes who I am or what I stand for. The room waited. Bongino slowly reached back into his briefcase. You done? He pulled out one final document. Because I have something else you really should see. He set it on the table. This is a cooperation agreement signed 6 months ago by Saikat Chakrabarty, your former chief of staff. He's the man who built your entire political operation from the ground up. The color completely drained from Ocasio-Cortez's face. He's been talking to federal investigators for half a year. He provided the emails, the financial records, and the text messages. Everything I presented today came from the man who knows exactly how your operation worked because he helped build it. Bongino pulled out another document. Your boyfriend, Riley Roberts. He's been interviewed twice by the FBI. He provided detailed records of every payment he received and exactly what he did to earn them, which was nothing. Another document appeared. 4 former staff members have given sworn statements about the working conditions in your office, the unpaid overtime, the verbal abuse, and the threats against anyone who complained. He spread them all across the table. You called this a witch hunt, but witch hunts chase imaginary enemies. The evidence against you is documented, corroborated, and undeniably real. Ocasio-Cortez turned desperately to her colleagues, to the other members of the squad, the women who had stood by her through every controversy, who had defended her against every attack. Ilhan, Rashida, Ayana, you know this is political persecution. You know what they're trying to do. Say something. Tell them. Silence. Representative Omar studied her notes intently. Representative Clyde was suddenly engrossed by something on her phone. Representative Presley looked away, out toward the gallery, at nothing in particular. Silence filled the room. Bongino's voice was low as he told her, They're not coming to rescue you. Everyone knew this was coming for weeks, they did. We made sure they were aware, and they've already made their choices. Then he pulled out a stack of printed statements. Representative Omar's statement, released just 5 minutes earlier, read, I have no knowledge of Representative Ocasio-Cortez's financial arrangements and cannot speak to any ongoing investigation. That was the end of that quote. He then held up another paper, one Representative Tlaib had released that very morning. It said, each congressional office is responsible for its own compliance with campaign finance regulations. I wish my colleague well during this difficult period, the quote concluded. Another, Representative Presley, hadn't issued a formal statement, but she had unfollowed you across all social media platforms yesterday and deleted every photo featuring both of you from the last 3 years. He gently set the papers down. They saw all the evidence. They calculated the odds carefully, and they chose to save themselves. Ocasio-Cortez looked around the room, her desperation growing, at her staff who couldn't meet her gaze, and at her colleagues who suddenly found reasons to be anywhere but there. She saw the cameras, still rolling, capturing every single moment of her collapse. She truly was utterly alone. This isn't fair, she whispered, barely audible. Her words came out broken, almost like a child's. I was trying to help people. I was trying to change things. I was trying to make a difference. Bongino's response wasn't cruel at all. It was simply tired and deeply disappointed. Maybe, at the very beginning, you truly were. Maybe there was a version of you who actually believed all the things you said. He closed his briefcase with a snap. But somewhere along the way, you started believing you were special, that the rules didn't apply to you, that you were too important to ever be held accountable, and that the people who supported you were mere tools to be used rather than citizens to be served. He looked at her with something that almost looked like pity. "I don't think you're evil, Congresswoman," he said. "I think you're what happens when someone gets famous too fast, gains too much power too young, with no one around willing to tell them no. I think you got lost somewhere between your first viral tweet and your 50th magazine cover." He then stood up. "But that doesn't undo the damage, does it? It doesn't give back the money. It doesn't unbreak the trust. And it certainly doesn't help the people you hurt." Chairman James cleared his throat, then addressed the ROI formally. "This committee has heard extensive testimony and examined substantial evidence concerning potential violations of federal campaign finance law, wire fraud statutes, and congressional ethics standards." He paused, letting the full weight of his words settle heavily in the air. "Based on today's proceedings, I am now directing committee staff to prepare a formal referral to the Department of Justice for a criminal investigation. Additionally, I am recommending that the House Ethics Committee open its own investigation immediately, without delay." He then looked directly at Ocasio-Cortez. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he stated, "you are strongly advised to retain experienced legal counsel. This hearing is adjourned." He brought the gavel down with a sharp final crack. Ocasio-Cortez tried to stand, but couldn't. Her legs simply wouldn't cooperate. She grabbed the table for support, her knuckles white against the dark wood. Her staff rushed over, attempting to help her. She pushed them away with trembling hands, shaking her head. "I can walk out of here myself," she insisted. She took only 3 steps toward the door before a blinding wall of camera flashes erupted. It was a blinding storm of light and noise. Reporters shouted questions at her from every single direction. "Congresswoman, will you resign? Do you have any response to these text messages? What do you say to all the donors who trusted you? Will you cooperate with the federal investigation?" She didn't answer a single word. She simply couldn't. Words had always been her most powerful weapon, but now they had abandoned her completely, leaving her defenseless. The door then closed behind her. The cameras kept flashing, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was already gone, vanished from sight. Her career didn't end with the drama of handcuffs or a public confrontation. It ended instead with silence and closed doors. And somehow, that was far, far worse. The news spread faster than anyone could have ever predicted. Within just 1 hour, the video clips were absolutely everywhere. Social media exploded with a torrent of reactions. Within 2 hours, every cable news network had cleared its regular programming for continuous, wall-to-wall coverage. Within 3 hours, the very first calls for her resignation began to come from members of her own party. They were quiet calls, careful calls, but calls nonetheless. Back in the Bronx, the reaction unfolded very differently from the usual political chatter in Washington. Maria Gonzalez sat in her small apartment that evening, watching the news coverage on an old television she genuinely couldn't afford to replace. The screen itself was quite old. The picture was fuzzy, yes, but the images flashed on screen were clear enough. In her weathered hands, she clutched a donation receipt, dated all the way back to 2018. It read, $50. It was a full day's wages from years ago. Back then, she had truly believed a local reporter. This reporter had somehow found her, then knocked on her door with a camera crew right behind, looking for the human story hidden behind all the numbers. "I believed in her," Maria said quietly. Her English carried an accent, but it was perfectly clear. She had practiced these very words in her head all afternoon. "I told my daughters, 'Look at this woman. She looks just like us. She talks about our struggles. She came from nothing, and now she's in Congress, fighting for people just like us.'" She looked down at the faded receipt in her hand. "I told my girls that if they worked hard and stayed honest, maybe they could really do something important, too. Maybe they could change things." The tears began to come slowly. "I skipped buying groceries that week, just to send her that money. I told myself it was an investment in our future, in our community, in someone who truly understood." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She called us stupid. She said we meter were easy to manipulate. She then laughed at us with her rich friends. The reporter asked what she wanted to say to Ocasio-Cortez. Maria thought for a long moment before answering. "I want to say that she broke something important, not just my trust, but something bigger. She made people like me afraid to believe in anyone ever again." She looked at the donation receipt one more time. "That's the worst part, not the $50. I can earn $50, but the hope she stole, I don't know how to get that back." Across the district, similar scenes played out through the evening and into the night, in bodegas and laundromats, in crowded apartments, where multiple families shared small spaces, in late-night diners where working people grabbed meals between shifts. People who had believed watched their faith collapse in real time. They had given her their votes, their money, their hope, and their dreams for something better. She had given them a performance. Dan Bongino did one interview that evening, and only one. He turned down the others. The reporter asked if he was proud of what he had accomplished. Bongino shook his head slowly. "Proud isn't the right word for any of this. There's nothing here to be proud of." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "A young woman destroyed her own career through arrogance and greed. Thousands of people who believed in her feel betrayed tonight. Her district still doesn't have the 25,000 jobs she killed. The immigrant families she used as props are still suffering at the border." He looked directly at the camera. "I didn't create this situation, I just exposed it. I presented evidence and let people draw their own conclusions." The reporter asked if he felt any sympathy for Ocasio-Cortez. Bongino thought about it before answering. "I feel sympathy for who she could have been. She had real gifts, intelligence, charisma, the ability to connect with people and inspire them. If she had used those gifts honestly, she might have actually accomplished something meaningful." He shook his head. "But she made different choices, and those choices led here." Later that night, Dan Bongino sat alone in his home office. The television was off. His phone was silenced. The folder that had contained his evidence was now filed away, its contents in the hands of federal investigators. He thought about the young woman who had walked into Congress 4 years ago. He had watched her rise like everyone else, had seen the fire in her eyes, the certainty in her voice. Her 29 years old and absolutely sure she was going to change the world. Somewhere along the way, she had started making choices. Small ones at first, probably. A donor not questioned too closely. An expense report fudged slightly. A private text message that said what she really thought. Until the small compromises became big ones. Until the lies grew too heavy to carry. Until the person she performed on camera had nothing in common with who she actually was in private. His phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor at the bureau. New file on your desk tomorrow. Different name. Same pattern. Bongino read the message twice, then set his phone down. There was always another one, always another politician who believed they were above the rules. Another true believer who traded their principles for power and comfort. Another promise broken to the people who could least afford broken promises. He filed the folder away in his cabinet with the others. Then he turned off the light and headed home to his family. Tomorrow, the work would continue. It always did. 3 days later, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez submitted her resignation from Congress. The letter was brief. It cited a need to focus on personal matters and spend time with family. It did not admit to any wrongdoing. It did not apologize to her donors. It did not acknowledge the people she had called stupid and easy to manipulate. The investigation continued without her. Subpoenas were issued. Grand juries were convened. The gears of justice were slow, but they were finally starting to grind. Back in the Bronx, life simply continued. Maria Gonzalez returned to her job at the laundromat the very next morning after the hearing. With bills to pay, children to feed, she had no time to mourn her shattered political aspirations. Even so, she took down the poster from her wall, the one showing Ocasio-Cortez's face, and that slogan about fighting for working families. Carefully, she folded it up and tossed it into the trash. Some things, once truly broken, simply can't be fixed.